Hello, and welcome to the MuseScore Café. Today is October 3rd, 2018, and my planned topic for today is to talk about Counterpoint, which is really one of my favorite musical topics to talk about. Sometimes I talk about, sometimes I'm talking more about internals of using the program, sometimes with MuseScore, sometimes I talk about miscellaneous things, like last week when I talked about my online course. This time, again, I want to really focus on music because that's why we're using MuseScore, presumably. And I want to talk about Counterpoint. And as always, I want to encourage people to ask questions, make comments on the topic of what I'm talking about, or anything, because really these are open-ended. I really want this just to be a talk about whatever's on people's minds and let me address questions and so forth. So, it's nice to see everyone here. I want to talk about what I mean by Counterpoint and why I think it's a relevant topic to us in the 21st century. So let me tell you a little bit about, first of all, just what I really mean by this. And what I mean by this, maybe the most classic example that I could come up with is to play you a section of a Bach fugue. Fugues are not the only example of counterpoint, but it's perhaps the clearest sort of thing. So I'm just going to start this playing, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're hearing. So anyhow, I forgot that this is a prelude and fugue. So when I hit home, it went all the way back. Maybe I should just, let me set myself a little. So I like to be able to show off features of MuseScore while I'm at it. So this says it's measure 21, so I can get back here any time by saying Control F for find and typing measure 21. That's just one more character than I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a rehearsal letter here. I'm going to click that rest and go Control M for rehearsal mark, and I will just put in, I don't know, A. So now that's rehearsal letter A, and I'll just sort of move this. I'm using the cursor keys to move it, just so I doesn't cover up anything else. So what we're actually looking at here, I should mention, Open WTC. This is the Well-Tempered Clavier. So it's the classic work by Bach that was a prelude and a fugue in all 12 keys, just to kind of prove it could be done, because the whole system of tuning instruments in a way that allowed all 12 keys to be equally playable was still kind of new at the time, and this was sort of a promo for it. At least that's the way the story's usually told. I really don't know the ins and outs of what really happened to bring this about. Open Well-Tempered Clavier was a project that was undertaken in conjunction with MuseScore and some other people who were interested in producing an open source version of the Well-Tempered Clavier. So by open source, I mean it's freely published. So anyone can go to musescore.com and download this collection of preludes and fugues that have been professionally edited, and then there's a professionally recorded CD that you can buy to go along with it, but you can also just access the music online for free because it's all meant to be free and open. It was funded by Kickstarter. Funded by, by ordinary people through Kickstarter, I should say. Anyhow, this was done in conjunction with the MuseScore 2.0 release. In fact, it was as a result of working on this that a lot of things that needed to happen. There was also the Open Goldberg project to do the Goldberg variations. And there's also now OpenScore, which is trying to produce these free open source editions of all classical music eventually. So anyhow, we are looking at one of the Bach fugues. This isn't necessarily one of the most popular ones, but it's the only one I ever learned to play start to finish completely myself as a pianist. So anyhow, it's the one I know the best as a player. I know some of the others from teaching them. So I use the word counterpoint. What do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is we have this melody, which I'll just go through and play it note by note. right? That melody. So that's the melody, and it's called the subject. Is the technical term that's used when you're writing a fugue. And then we have a variation of that same melody coming in. It originally started on an F. The next entrance starts on B flat, and it's almost the same melody. There's only this very slight adjustment at the beginning here. The original melody was a step and then up a fourth. The slight adjustment is, instead of a step, it's a third, and instead of a fourth, it's a fifth. This adjustment is made very specifically according to kind of, I shouldn't say rules, but the conventions of the style, so that this entrance would come in, even though it enters starting on a different pitch, it enters starting a fourth or a fifth away, it would still feel like it's actually in the same key. So we do this adjustment so that so it's originally B flat major, and the adjustment to come in so that even though it starts on a different pitch, still seems like it's in the key of B flat. So this is something that's done in fugues. It's not inherently true of all counterpoint, but it's just part of the process of writing fugues. And then we allow the sort of variations that allow it to feel like we've actually modulated now to the key of F. We see these E naturals showing up. So anyhow, we have this melody at the beginning that's called the subject. Then we have essentially the same melody. Bum 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 boo dum boo doo da doo 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 dum boo dum doo 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 dum. Then the same melody again enters again in another voice down here, and this time it's back to the original pitch level, no adjustments. Bum bum. Bum 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 bum. I'm an octave too low. So this is what's called a three-voice fugue. We have the original statement of the subject, we have the answering statement here, and then we have another one that comes in here in the third voice. There's also four-voice fugues, five-voice fugues. You have as many voices in your fugue as you want. 3 and 4 are really common in box writing. So this style of counterpoint, where we have different voices entering with different melodic statements, and yet while the second voice is coming in with this melody, the first voice is going on and doing some new stuff. And some of the stuff that's in this top voice is kind of related to what was in the original. This kind of feels like right? It kind of feels like a variation on that. And this is all very deliberate, that there are these references so that this voice, the top voice, what's going on in it relates to what's going on in the bottom voice. And then often it'll be the case that when the third voice comes in, now the second voice will imitate to some extent what the first, so when the second voice came in, the first voice had this other thing to do. But now when the third voice comes in, the second voice does some variation of what the first voice did here. And here we have except I'm at the wrong pitch level, but there it is. So this whole process of how the different entrances come in, what keys they're in, what the other voices do meanwhile, this is all specific to the process of writing a fugue. But the idea of counterpoint is that this isn't melody against chords. In other words, this isn't something where we just have the right hand playing a melody and then the left hand just playing chords. We have the hands doing independent melodies, and not just the hands, but we really have 3 independent melodies going on at the same time, right? When this second voice starts doing what the first voice was doing, now the first voice is doing something else. And yeah, it's sometimes taking a little breather, but there's times when all 3 voices are all active. So if I start, in fact, let me just start here. When the third voice comes in. And now we state the original theme again at that modified pitch level. there's like a little modulation to G minor here from B flat. And again, it's all the same melodies. Here's that bum, bum, boom, bum, boo, dum. Bum, bum, boom, bum, ba-dum. This is the same version as we had here in the second voice. Bum, bum, boom, bum, boo-dum. And then in the bass voice, we get ba-do-da-um, which was the same melody we saw elsewhere. And these things are starting to overlap each other. They're coming in like one entrance comes in before the other one even finishes. That's another feature of writing a fugue. So I'm talking about fugues a lot because they're really, really fascinating how they're put together and how all this works. But this, at some level, is maybe like the ultimate manifestation of what we mean by counterpoint. But counterpoint doesn't have to be that complex. It's just the idea of having something where instead of having a melody over just plain chords happening as an accompaniment, like there's the melody, the interesting part, and then there's the chords, the stuff that's accompanying the melody. It's independently interesting parts. One of them might be the most interesting at one time, but the other part is meant to be interesting as well. So what we're going to do, sometimes the second entrance is on the fourth, not fifth. Yes. The way fugues are generally written is that the entrance, oops, so I accidentally hit home again. So because I entered that rehearsal letter, I can go Control F A and get back to my fugue. Good. So the entrance is normally at a fifth above. The second entrance here is normally a fifth above the original entrance or fourth below. In other words, it's in the key of the five, except we make these modifications. So this really should have been a C. If we were to literally transpose this up a fifth or down a fourth, this should have been a C. But if we had a C, then this passage wouldn't feel as much like it was still in the key of B flat. So that sort of adjustment to the pitches to kind of keep the flavor of the original but make these slight adjustments to still feel like we're in the original key. That's just sort of part of what the rules or the conventions of writing a fugue allow for, what's called a real versus a okay, so my mind's blanking on me. Someone help me out. What's it called? I should, well, whatever. It's there's the name for it when it has that adjustment to kind of keep it feeling like you're still in the original key. And there's a few other adjustments that get made. So, but that's specific to writing fugues. I want to talk about just the general process of counterpoint. The general idea of having multiple melodies is something we can use anytime we want, and it's very old. So you think of Baroque as old music, maybe, because it's like this piece was written in the early 1700s, but counterpoint as a technique was around for hundreds of years already. So normally when you study counterpoint in college, like in music school, you'll have one course on Renaissance counterpoint and another entire course on Baroque counterpoint, and sometimes they'll each be like a couple semesters long. I have actually taught a college course in which we do both Renaissance and Baroque counterpoint all in one semester, which at first I thought, well, this is crazy. This is too much material to cover. And in some sense, it is. But in another sense, it's actually nice because it allows me to really talk more about the generalities of, what really counterpoint is, and just use Renaissance and Baroque examples of some general principles. And so I've come to appreciate this method of teaching things. So let me, I keep flipping back around here, sorry. I am going to just create a score, and I'm going to do it with the grand staff. And we'll be in the key of C because I forgot to enter any other key signature. And I'm just going to enter a little melody. I often use Mary Had a Little Lamb for my examples, and by God, I'm going to do that. And so, because I also, when I think about it, I'm going to compare this to the example I did a few weeks ago where I did an SATB arrangement. My SATB arrangement was just melody against chords. There we go. So what if I were to take that and want to say I want to do something that's counterpointy with it, or polyphonic is actually polyphony, polyphonic. Those are the other words that go along with the idea of counterpoint. So I can see already I should have done G as my key, so I'm just gonna, I can drag this G, and for some reason I don't use drag and drop a lot, and my mouse is slowing down. Wow, and it's not working right now. So I'm not going to use drag and drop. So I'm not sure actually that's weird. What is going on? That's unfortunate. I don't know actually why drag and drop isn't working for me at the moment. I should check and see if it's just that palette. All right, so it's just my my mouse settings have probably gotten messed up, so that double clicking isn't doing what I want it to do. So sorry to bother you with that. Luckily, you don't need to double click. You just click here. I mean, you don't need to drag. You can click here and then double click there to add a key signature. So I want to get that melody in the top voice. So I'm going to select this whole top staff, but then I'm going to use the selection filter, which is View, Selection Filter, or the keyboard shortcut F6. And I'm going to turn off voice 2. So only voice 1 is selected, and then do my copy. And then I'll go ahead and re-enable that because I don't need to keep that filter going. Now I can paste, and only voice 1 is in there. So I have my melody. If I want to enter counterpoint for this, I don't have to do the thing like they do in a fugue where they wait for the first voice to finish and then they come in a fifth higher or a fourth lower, blah, blah, blah. That's fugue writing. That's not counterpoint. Counterpoint, I mean, it is counterpoint, but it's not the only thing counterpoint is. Counterpoint is just the idea of having an independent melody. And so what I mean by independent means, well, A, the rhythms probably, well, they just seem like they each stand alone. So here we have a melody that's interesting. It's got quarter notes, it's moving by step, it's got some moving passages, some static passages, the half notes where it kind of stays still. The accompaniment is very much not that. It's nothing but half notes. It's much less interesting. So instead, I want to write a counter melody to this, a counterpoint to it that is just as interesting as the original melody. And so there's a lot of different ideas, different techniques you would use for this. One of them is just to say, I want to have a melody line that is moving less while this one is moving more while this one is moving less. You don't have to organize things that way, but it's a common thing to do. So I might try to write something that has more half notes during this part and then definitely is moving here. But I also feel like I want some eighth notes happening here because this melody is pretty boring with just the quarter notes. So I'm probably going to make some eighth notes happen in this passage also. So when you learn Renaissance counterpoint, you will learn generally in a college course what's called species counterpoint, a whole technique of figuring out how to write half notes against quarter notes, or how to write eighth notes against quarter notes, or triplets, and all these different things. It's sort of an artificial teaching technique to get you thinking about the different ways that you can enter different rhythms against each other and what the rules or conventions are for how you treat dissonance. So I'm not going to attempt to teach you a college course on counterpoint. I just want to sort of show you what it might look like. So what I want to do is I'm going to keep referring to the original here, my original harmonization, and I'm going to try to stick with this as long as I can. I'm just going to write a few measures, but I'm going to try to stick with this harmonization. I have a 1 chord going to a 4 chord, going to what I called here 2 of 2, but it's basically 3. Right? This is a G major chord. This is a C major chord. This is a B minor chord. This is an E 7th chord. So I'm going to try to see if I can keep that while I add another melody here. So if I want to talk about this being a G chord here, I've already got my B. So I feel like I need a G. And since I said I want to have like less motion here while there's more motion here, I might as well start off with just a half note G. So I'll enter a half note G. But I don't want it to just be half notes. So I feel like I'm already itching to start moving. So what I might want to do is think about target points here. Like at this point, now that this note is a G, I kind of feel like I want a B here. But if I'm looking at this, I have a G getting to a B. If I want to make this a melody, let's make it a melody. Instead of making that be a half note, I'm going to make it be a dotted quarter and go G, A, B, So I'm going to do that. So just to give you a little MuseScoreism here, I've got a half note selected. If I press Shift Q, that's going to shorten it by just the length that will allow a dot to appear. Shift Q shortens things. Shift W lengthens them by, adding dots and shortening them with dots. So Q and W lengthen and shorten without dots, just doubling and having things. Shift Q and Shift W lengthen and shorten things using dots. So I'm making my melody go G, A, B. And then I, at this point, could just think about what I want my melody to look like. But I also need to be thinking ahead because I want it to be supporting what I want to make happen harmonically. And I'm supposed to make some sort of B minor chord show up here, which makes me feel like I've got the root of that chord. The most important other note is going to be the third. Fifths, when I only have two notes to express a harmony, I'm going to focus on the root and the third usually. So B is the third of my chord. B is the root of my chord. I need the fifth. So I feel like I need a D. So I'll go ahead and just enter a D here for the moment. And then I look at this and say, well, I could just enter another quarter note here. Bum, 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 bum. I could do that, but if I want to really think of this as an independent rhythm, maybe I go with that whole dotted quarter motif. And so I'm going to use Shift W to lengthen that, and now I'll enter an eighth note C. Bum, 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 bum. And now I kind of feel like I've established that eighth notes are present. I kind of feel like I want more eighth notes. I like eighth notes. Eighth notes is going to give me this sense of motion, which was very, very absent in my plain SATB version. So instead of making that a quarter note, I'm just going to make that be an eighth note. Now, I would love to say if I just press W, that would shorten that to an eighth note. But I can see right now eighth note is already selected here. Because of whatever the last thing I did was. So if I press W, that's actually going to turn this to a 16th. Not something, let's see. Yeah, I just pressed the left arrow, then the right arrow. That got me back to quarter note. Now I'll press W. Oops, I meant Q. So Q once to shorten it back to a quarter. Q again to turn it into an eighth. And now I am going to think about where else I need to be with my line. So I can kind of shape this line the way I want an eighth note line to be, but I know I'm going to want the third of this chord. There's supposed to be an E dominant seventh chord here. And the root is actually missing. And I can live without a root in some cases because that has its own effect. But I'm going to need that third. I'm going to need that G sharp. So I think I'm going to try to hit the G sharp right on beat 3 and then continue on to get to the E. So if I time this run right, I could just start descending in eighth notes, go right through the G sharp, and then hit an E here. So that's what I'm going to aim for. So I've got my D. Let me think about this. If I just go C, B, A, and then keep going, G sharp, F sharp, E. So as an independent line, this is great. I've got eighth notes coming down. That should be fine. So counterpoint is largely about having independent lines, but it's also about making sure they work together. So I was very careful to make this outline something reasonable. I need to make sure that anytime two notes sound together, that they are treated appropriately as far as whether it's a dissonant or consonant interval and how this all works. And so again, there's very different conventions for Renaissance versus Baroque and more modern styles. So I'm going to be careful that I pay attention to what's happening here. So one of the, I see a question here, beware of parallel fifths. So yes, obviously if you've studied, well, I shouldn't say obviously, if you study writing of like, whether it's counterpoint or writing four-part stuff like this, we learn to avoid parallel fifths. They are evil. And I accidentally did a hidden fifth here, where I have a fifth between these two notes, and then followed by a fifth here. They're not parallel because one of them's ascending, the other one's descending, but still not great, and I missed it. I haven't had any fifths, right? I've been very careful. This interval is a third, this interval is a sixth. That's because I've been focusing on the roots and thirds of chords. If I'm focusing on roots and thirds of chords, I'm never going to have any fifths. So I'm going to pay attention that I don't create any. Like right here, I did, by going all the way down to the root, I created a situation where these two notes are a fifth apart. So I will want to make sure that I don't also put a D down here. If I put a D down here, then I'll have these two notes a fifth apart, followed by these two notes a fifth apart. That will be not good. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make sure I don't do a D. So thanks for giving me that little heads up. But other than that, I don't have any fifths going on. So this interval here was fine. I have the root and third of a chord, so this interval is fine. It's a sixth. This interval is an octave here, and that's fine. This interval here is a third. So with the places where my notes sound simultaneously have all been consonant intervals, and all of my motion is stepwise. So even without knowing all of the rules, and again, rules, let me give you one of my favorite musical aphorisms. Is that the right word? I don't even know if that's how you say it. I just want to take a little brief thing to talk about rules in music. So rules in music aren't like laws that tell you what you can and cannot do. They're often taught in that way, but that's not what they are. In other words, if I talk about a rule in music that says don't have parallel fifths, it's not don't have parallel fifths or you will go to jail. It's not that. It's not like the rule against insider trading or the rule against robbery. Rules in music are like the law of gravity. You can't break the law of gravity. The law of gravity tells you what is. If you jump up in the air, you will come back down. That's what law of gravity tells you. It tells you what happens. Or if I take this business card here and I drop it, it will fall. I think that's in camera range, right? If I drop that, it will fall. But gravity doesn't care if I drop it or not. It tells me what happens if. So I will similarly say this is what is the case with rules in music, like the rule talking about parallel fifths, or the rule saying make these adjustments when you come in with the second voice in a fugue. You can do it. It's just that if you do it, it's going to create a certain effect. Then you have to decide, do I want this business card here, or do I want the business card there? Law of gravity tells me if I drop it, that's going to happen. Then I decide which effect I want. Well, if I'm trying to write music that sounds like Bach, then I want the business card up here. I don't want it down there, or just to make an analogy. With parallel fifths or any other rule that we learn in music, it's the same. You don't go to jail if you write parallel fifths. You just write music that doesn't sound like Bach. It's going to have a different sound to it. And yet that sound could be perfectly appropriate writing a different style of music. So the rules that we talk about are rules about how to achieve a certain effect, not what you must or must not do. And sometimes you want to achieve that effect, so you obey that rule. If you don't want to achieve that effect, you break that rule. But obey and break, that's like missing the point. Again, these aren't what you should or shouldn't do. They're cause and effect rules. So even the word obey and break are really misleading when it talks about rules, when we talk about rules in music. But we do it all the time. So I think we understand what we mean, or at least I hope that you understand then what I mean. If I say the rule is to do this, it doesn't mean you must do it. It means this is how you achieve that effect. And so then you decide when you want that effect. So anyhow, that's a little aside on rules. So I've got a fifth here. I'm going to avoid having a fifth here because I do want this to feel like it's the kind of thing Bach might have written or Mozart might have written. So I've got this lovely descending line. I want to think about what I do want to harmonize here. So I need to remember what my harmonization is there. And my harmonization there was this really kind of creative thing that I came up with that was essentially a French sixth, an augmented sixth chord. It's not a type of chord that Bach used a whole lot, but it is in there. I shouldn't say didn't use a whole lot. It's in there. I'll just say that. But I'm not specifically going for Bach. I'm going for me in a style that feels like it's using from this. So maybe if this is the way Mozart would have written it instead, that's fine. So I really want to get this E flat business in here, but it's going to be tricky to really say something about this chord. So I'm not sure that my counterpoint version is going to really obey this chord. It might have the more expected chord there, which is just going to be a 2 chord. We've got 2 of 2, we've got 5, 7 of 2. This really could just be a 2. So I'm not sure. I might try it and see what I get. But I'm not sure how my line in only 2 beats is going to convey enough of this chord to be useful. But I'm going to try it because why not? If I actually put the E flat right here, I've got a dissonance here. And so, again, if I'm trying to write in the style of Bach, I'm going to obey the very specific rules for handling of dissonance that would have applied there. This should be approached by step, resolved by step, etc. I'm not necessarily going to be worried about all the specific rules of the specific style of Bach. In the Renaissance, this would not have happened anyhow. We would definitely not have a tritone interval of 2 simultaneous notes right on the downbeat. No, I don't care how you approach it or resolve it. That just wouldn't have happened. I might still think, even then, just because I'm looking at this E flat and then thinking, well, where is this E going to go? I could hang here for a whole beat, but then I lose my motion right when I need it the most, when this guy's not moving at all. So I kind of want to keep moving, but I want to move. If I move, I guess, down to a D, I could come back up to the E flat. My gut is telling me no, but that's just my gut. Let's actually hear it. Oops, 8th note, 4, D. All right, we're just going to play it from here since we haven't heard it yet. So that's not terrible, but let me think about what else is going to happen after this. I have a G and I have a C sharp. Now, realistically, the C sharp is the thing that makes it an augmented 6th chord, and I'm not sure how I could actually make that happen in the 2 beats that I have here. So I might choose not to do that. If I can get up, I'm think, well, I could do that. If I go E flat, if I go down to the C sharp, I'm probably breaking all sorts of stylistic rules. But if I keep going down to the C sharp here, and then I'm trying to come to D here. So if I did that, and I know I'm not really going to want a half note, I need this to keep moving because this guy stopped. In principle, this would work. It's not necessarily consistent with my other analysis, but let me just hear it again. Whoops. And I don't like this at all, to be honest. So I'm changing my scheme. I feel like if I were to go with this, just go to a plain 2 chord here, and then this, which is implying a secondary dominant. So this is an A minor chord. This is implying an A major chord going to the D. This might do it for me. I'm going to hear it. So that's a little more plain. I could go directly to my secondary dominant. So I kind of like that better, except I'm not really just going to keep this 2 C sharps. In fact, I'm just going to keep that 8th note running. So here's like a standard trick. It's a marking time trick. I know I just want to get to this D, but I actually don't want a D because that's just going to give me the root and 5th of the chord here with no 3rd. I'd rather make my way to an F sharp. But if I did want to just take basically 2 beats to get from C sharp to D, I could just do that by going ba, and then enter a B, and then this type of figure is all over Baroque music for exactly this reason, and classical music. We really are just trying to get from C sharp to D, but we don't want to just have a half note. So we're like, let's just mark time. That's a marching band term where you sit there and go. So that's standing in and basically marching in a little circle. So that's what I'm doing here, is this is just taking my time to get from C sharp to D. I could have gotten there in just a step, but I'm just creating a little eighth note line that makes that feel a little, I don't know, like I had motion. So if I play this, that's actually not bad. But I mentioned that I really don't like just having this, what's called an open fifth. When you only have two voices, just having the root and fifth together is not very satisfying. I'd rather have the third in there, but that's fine. I can get that third. I'm going to use Shift-Alt up arrow to move this diatonically. Now this line is, I wrote this line originally to mark time, but it's still a fine line. So this might make me happy. It's not what I probably would have done. I probably would have gone something like that. And that line feels a little more natural to me. The idea is my previous line, let me undo those changes. There we go. I have like a step, a little leap, and another step all in the same direction. That doesn't feel quite as satisfying to me as what I ended up with instead. I'm redoing now. Control Z was undo, Shift Control Z is redo. So now I have a line where I have my little leap and then it resolves by step in the opposite direction. Another one of these rules. It's just creates a certain satisfying result. A tiny little leap like that of a third, no big deal if you want to resolve it in the same direction, but my gut was telling me I might like this a little better. And then I know I need to make my way to a G here because I'm supposed to come back to a 1 chord. And so I could aim for this G down here and try to arpeggiate my way down to that G, but that feels a little silly to me. I feel like I'm going to enter the G first, and now I might use one of my marking time tricks here and go, although I do feel like I want to get the D in there, so I might go, let's see, I'll try bum, 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 bum. Right? This little line here is another kind of cliche of the music for exactly the same reason. We're trying to get from F sharp to G, and we could get there by just having a half note, but we want motion, so I'm creating motion, right? Now I've created a whole ton of eighth note motion here. I think I probably want to stop that motion here. It feels like a good stopping place, and then I'll create it again here. So I might actually let this be a half note. And then continue my eighth note motion here into the next phrase. So for the next phrase, I'm going to enter a G way down here, and now I might, on this beat, enter some eighth notes to kind of get me down. Won't you take me down? That's a different style of music. So I could, if I was really thinking about making this vocal music, I would be thinking stepwise motion, but I know arpeggios are a thing, and depending on what instruments are going to play this, the following line may or may not make sense, but I'm just arpeggiating down to reach that G. And it's kind of nice because it gave me 2 chord tones here that are a pleasing interval apart, a third apart. So this line that I just created, I'm really thinking about the melodic line that I'm creating, the rhythms that I'm creating, the shape of the line. Yes, I'm making it harmonize the way I want, but I'm thinking equally about the melodic line itself. So let's hear what this sounds like. Here we go. So when you see people like Beethoven or Mozart or anyone like that writing theme and variations, this is one of the techniques that they might be using. Saying, we've got our melody, let's do a version of it where we have it just harmonized with static chords, but let's have another version where we harmonize it using counterpoint. Now this is just 2-voice counterpoint. I've gone on long enough that I don't want to belabor this, but I could create a third voice in here by looking for what the missing notes are in the chords that I've created and try to similarly thread an interesting line through there. Because this line is moving so fast, my other line would move more slowly. In fact, let me just do a real quick version of that, because I'm quite sure I can do this. So if I go to voice 2 here, I know I need a D in this chord. So I'm just going to enter half notes, D, and then this chord is also missing a D. So I might just lengthen that, make it be a whole note. And then at this point, the note that's missing is the F sharp. So I'll enter an F sharp. At this point, the note that's missing is the E. So I'm going to enter the E. And then I don't want to just double the E here. Now the G sharp is gone by the time I get here. So maybe I'll put the G sharp here. And then on this chord here, I don't have the 5th, but I also don't have a 7th, and I feel like a 7th would be quite nice. So I'm going to enter a G, make sure I get a courtesy natural in there. By the way, there's a lovely plugin for courtesy accidentals. You can just select the music and go, well, I guess I deleted my plugins a bit ago, but there's a wonderful Add Courtesy Accidentals plugin that you can download from MuseScore.org. And when you do that, you can just select your music, run the plugin, and it figures out all the places to add courtesy accidentals like this. So I will let that G, I don't want to let that G ride for the whole measure, for the whole 2 beats, because again, this rule about parallel fifths also applies to parallel octaves, and I see a G here and a G here. And so if I let this G go down to F sharp as well as that G, that's not going to be good, but this G really is supposed to go to F sharp. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to let him change to another chord tone. I guess I'm starting to write myself into a little box here. If I enter a C sharp down here, this leap here is a leap down of a tritone. Some styles, vocalists probably wouldn't give that to. Instrumentalists, no big deal. And now I will enter the D that's mostly missing there, and then the D that's mostly missing here, and then maybe a G here. So this isn't much of a melody now. This is kind of the filler part, but I can certainly make it a little more interesting. Like to get from this D to the F sharp, I'm going to want an E. And now I ask myself, where do I want that E? Do I want the E rhythmically coming in here? Actually, you know, now that I look at it, my original switched to a 4 chord in the middle. So if I did that, if I switched this to a C, and then switched this to a half note then, right? So that I have a C. I'm going awfully fast here, but what the heck? I might not have wanted a C originally because I thought I wanted these 2 voices to have the root and third of the chord. So if I was aiming for, if I had been aiming for a C chord, I probably would have put an E in here so I could get the third of the chord and not just have root and fifth. But since I know I've got a third voice to deal with, I could, well, I'm going to go ahead, stick with my original plan. That's an E. And now I'm going to rethink this. Boom. That's now a quarter note. And then, I don't know. I feel like I'm now confusing the matter. So I'm actually going to undo all that, leave this the way it was. I just want to get an E in here for melodic reasons. So I'm going to just lose that 4 chord that I had in there for now. So I could think about where I want my E rhythmically. I could add it right here, and that would give me like an E minor chord there, but I don't really want a chord. I just want that note to be there. I don't really want to enter that E here because I'm going to have 2 notes of fourth away, 2 notes of fourth away. There's no rule against it. It's just not all that pleasing. But I feel like if I brought the E in with the C, that would be more pleasing. So I'm going to change this to a dotted half. So double dotted halves are a thing. They're not my favorite thing. I often prefer to notate this as a dotted half tied to an eighth, or a half note tied to a dotted quarter, depending on the context. But double dots are a thing. So if I do this, now I have a slightly smoother motion. And then boom, bum, boo, bum, bum. I'm trying to sing my way through the line to see how singable it is. I'm not a singer, obviously, but, you know, I can get a sense of what's singable. It's awkward. But, you know, I'm not a professional alto or a professional tenor or a professional singer of any kind. This is singable. This isn't what I would write if I was trying to make it easy to sing. I would definitely adjust some of these intervals to make them more singable. This line is much more singable than this line is, even though this is moving a lot. The intervals here, having to get this G sharp and then come down to the G. So you've got this chromatic alteration to make and then fix and then have a leap of a tritone. You know, there's a little awkwardness in it, but it should sound pretty good, actually. So if this was an instrumental piece, this would work really well. And I'm just going to play it here. I want to enter a final note here before I do. So let me, let's see. I feel like this voice has been so interesting. I want him to take some motion now, so I'm just going to let it start moving. And I'm gonna go with a stylistic thing that's a little more modern, a lot more modern. I'm gonna let there be a dissonance right on the downbeat. There we go. So I'm letting there be this dissonance right here. This is a dissonance by Renaissance or Baroque standards, but boy, this is a major chord with an added second. It's just a huge part of pop music. Huge part of pop music. So to me, this is actually quite pleasing and isn't dissonant. Anyhow, let's hear what this sounds like. There we go. So anyhow, this is what counterpoint can also mean. It's not necessarily about writing fugues. It's about creating accompaniment that honors a particular type of harmony that you might be going for. You know, if you might be going to aim for these chords, but you don't want to do this in this static way. You want to create something where you've got interesting lines. I created, even without voice 2, even without this third voice that I added here, it was already harmonically complete. You know, I had 2 notes of every triad, which is really enough to establish it. And then by adding a third voice, I was able to complete the harmony. And then I spent a little time thinking about, well, gee, is this reasonable as a melody? The more additional voices you add, the less interesting each generally might be. But it's good because now it gives me a more static. I've got a one voice moving in mostly quarters, another moving in mostly eighths, and another moving in mostly halves, and it's kind of all, they blend together and balance. And what I could do if I then was really trying to do things is switch on. Now that I know I'm writing for 3 voices, I might choose to keep this a half note here and have this guy start moving in eighth notes. Right? If I know that I'm gonna I'm just doing a really quick version of this. 5, 5. So now I've sort of transferred where the motion is. There was motion here, and now there's motion here. So I voice leading wise, I didn't really break any rules, so this should also sound about as pleasing. At this point, right, the eighth notes, I miss the eighth note so badly. Well, this guy's got to make it from D to G. Can you see me pointing? It's got to make it from D to G, so why not just do that? Boom, 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 whoops, D. Okay, a seldom used but occasionally useful command, shift left arrow, will exchange 2 notes of the same rhythmic value while you're in note input mode. See, shift left, shift right. It's almost never actually specifically useful, but I saw an opportunity there to show it to you. So I'm boom, bum, boo, dum. So I just created a little moving line. It sort of suggested a 5 chord here. I see some more. Oh, I hear it's a good suggestion here. Leap of G to C sharp is fine. Yeah, it's fine. It's just not easy. So it depends on what your audience is. It's a diminished fifth, verify. Yeah, so it's singable. It's just not, if you're writing for a beginning audience, it's harder, than if you weren't. And again, this line would not be as common. This leap of a diminished fifth would not be as common in the Renaissance as it would be later. But yeah, it's okay, and I'm fine with it. I'm just thinking, I'm comparing what's easy and what's less easy for beginners, because I do a lot of writing for beginning ensembles, both vocal and instrumental. Instrumentalist, you could write any interval you want, and it's just pressing different buttons. So it's okay. So yeah, it is great what we can get out of this melody. It can be really amazing that you can take a very simple melody and by adding, interesting things to it, make it as interesting as you want. So I did this little thing here where I've implied a D chord here. This note, this stayed G, and that's fine. This is called pedal point if you want to put a classical term on it. The harmony, the bass note stays the 1 while we have implication of changing chords above it. 1, changing to 5, changing back to 1. So I feel like this will actually be fairly pleasing. Now, I wrote this and wasn't thrilled with how this actually sounded in here, so I might, revisit that if I were to really be composing on this. But let's just hear what we have. Yeah, so obviously I can keep going like this, but this is basically the process. Even if you're writing 3-voice counterpoint, it can be useful to start with just 2 and then go from there. It still bothers me a little bit that I really wanted this to be, originally speaking, wanted it to be that chord, right? I wanted it to be a 4 chord here. So I still kind of want to make that happen, just to see what I can make happen with it. If I do this, I don't really even, I'm like looking, how about if I go 5, I'm looking at melody simultaneously with looking at the harmonization. I'm looking at what makes sense melodically to get me from this G to the C, but I'm also looking at what's going to line up here. I can have octaves here, and one of them's ascending, one's descending, so I know I'm not going to have parallel octaves or anything like that. I have a 5th here, but then there's no corresponding 5th there, so I should be fine. So this should be okay. And then I have not a full measure of 8th notes here. I don't really get the consistent 8th notes to here, and it's in different voices. So and then here, there's a whole string of 8ths in the same voice. Here, it's in different voices, and there's an arpeggio. I feel like this is going to be an interesting flow of the 8th notes. So let's hear this, and then maybe I'm done with those 4 bars. There you go. So I say I'm done, but I feel like I still want there to be a finished chord there. So let's just hear that last little bit. Yeah, so that feels like that finished that thought a little better. I would, carry that same process through if I was going to finish it. So I think I like this a little better. I feel like maybe I wanted there to be a couple of 8th notes here, and so I might look at these 2 voices and think which ones, because they're both only moving by step. So again, it's going to be kind of a marking time technique, but I feel like if I change this to a quarter and then go, I don't know, what do you guys think? I think if I went, my first instinct is to do this. I'm creating a dissonance here, but I'm resolving it by step. I'm approaching it by step. Again, specific. So there's a question about, I'm going to get to that question in a second, and then I'm going to wrap up. But I want to hear this. So here I have a dissonance right on the beat. Some styles, that's okay. Some styles, less so. I'm less worried about obeying a style more, whether it feels like it's going to feel natural to me. And I'm looking at it, and I'm approaching it in contrary motion. And I feel like this is probably going to make me happy. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. All right. So question came up about plugins to check for parallel intervals, and yes, there are. I'm whispering this because I don't want all the theory students to say, oh, good, now I don't have to search for parallel fifths myself. But it checks for parallelisms as well as much else. So actually, I've already downloaded it. So I'm just going to go to the plugin manager, and I'm going to re-enable it. I disabled the all my plugins while I was developing my online course, which if you haven't gone to masteringmusescore.com and checked out my online course, please do. End of commercial. Check harmony rules is the one we want. I'm also going to add my config courtesy accidentals and remove courtesy accidentals, and I'm going to add back tempo changes because I like that one. Fix fingering. These are my favorite plugins. Check harmony rules, add config, and remove courtesy accidentals. There's one called Fix Fingering. I don't use fingerings much myself, but it's a great plugin and I love demonstrating it. Same with Check Harmony Rules and tempo changes for doing rubatos and so forth. So I've enabled them all, and now I'm going to select everything in my score and I'm going to run proofreading, check harmony rules. Oops. So it looks like it found nothing. Let's see if we can't give it something to find. So here we have, how hard should we have it look? If I give, I'm going to make a really easy case out of this. I'm going to make this be a G and this be an A. If I do that, we have a parallel fifth between this G, that C is a fifth, and then that A and that D. Let's rerun the plugin. There it is. So it calls it Open 5. I think it was actually written by someone and then translated from another language. In any case, it will identify parallel fifths, and notice it highlighted the notes and put the text on it. And then you can just undo that. In fact, I'm going to undo all those changes because I liked my music. It will find parallel fifths. It will find awkward melodic leaps, and I notice it didn't complain about this either, so point taken. It finds all sorts of things other than just parallel fifths. And so it can be useful for theory students who want to kind of check their work, have an easier way, because if you take a theory class writing either in Counterpoint, but especially 4-part SATB writing, you spend half your life checking your work looking for parallel fifths. That's not too big of an overstatement, those of you who have taken music theory before. So having a plugin that can do that for you, it's not exactly cheating any more than having a calculator is cheating in math class, and yet it sort of feels like you should learn to add without a calculator. Then once you learn, then the calculator is there. Similarly with this, you should really understand what it means to look for parallel fifths. Avoid them. Like you notice I was saying I was not concerned about them because I just wasn't writing fifths. Every time I wrote a fifth, I knew it. And I don't like writing fifths. I don't like writing just a root and a fifth. I like having thirds in my chords. And then when I do have the root and the fifth in the chord, I'm aware of where they are, and I'm trying to change inversions and so forth, so I'm not always having these root position chords. I write in a way in which I don't tend to create parallel fifths in the first place. Anyhow, that's neither here nor there. This is once more what my piece sounds like, because I'm going to play these first 5 measures and then I think call it a day. So there you go. That is using counterpoint techniques, not to write a fugue, but to take this harmonization that we came up with a few weeks ago and elaborate it in a style that is more contrapuntal. Now here I did it from scratch, just writing. Yeah, I'm going to finish it. Tell you what, I'll write 3 more measures and complete the thing, and then I will post it to musescore.com and post the link in the comment to this video. So what you could also do is just look at this and say, well, I want to do some of the same things, right? Just take our original version and just say, well, let's make this melodically interesting. Instead of just that half note there, let's go with right, just do that, and right, and just look for places to take your basic harmonization and add more interest to it. that's counterpoint 2. It's counterpoint that starts from a place of writing a more static harmony. This is counterpoint that started right off as counterpoint, although I was trying to obey this harmony. You can write counterpoint that's not trying to obey any particular harmony. And if you obey the traditional rules for what intervals to use, it will imply chords. And really this predates chords, which is why Renaissance and Baroque counterpoint are taught in 2 separate courses so often. Renaissance harmony, Renaissance writing, they weren't thinking about chords. The concept of a triad didn't really exist in their thinking. Not to say that there wasn't, theory texts in which people were proposing triads as a model. It wasn't how people thought in the Renaissance. And yet they were writing in ways that we can look at now and say, oh yeah, this is clearly outlining this triad or outlining that triad or suggesting this chord progression. It just wasn't what they were thinking, but it was getting you there anyhow. So you can totally write 2-voice counterpoint without thinking about what the harmony is. It's just in the 20th century or 21st century, I can't help but also think about harmony, especially when I put all this work into coming up with a cool harmonization. So all that said, I'm going to wrap up, because for those of you who are not music theory geeks, some of this was probably, but hopefully you got something out of it to see what the process looks like of writing interesting accompaniment to your music by not thinking of it quite so much as accompaniment, but thinking of the individual lines you're creating. How can I outline the harmony in a melodically interesting way? Then this is a way that when you are harmonizing your own pieces or whatever, you can, because I see a lot of pieces on MuseScore.com that really do look like this, or just a melody in this staff and then triads on this staff. And I see a lot of my students playing the piano that way. So I'm trying to show people that there's other ways of creating music. Now this is obviously sounds very late Baroque, early classical, because that's the style I was writing in. But you can use these same techniques writing in a jazz style or writing in a rock style or whatever. Just this idea that you want to have individual parts that are melodically interesting, and then you make them melodically interesting within the bounds of that genre. If I wanted this to sound more like jazz, well, I wouldn't be writing half notes and eighth notes like this. I'd be writing syncopations and so forth. So, a bit of a drawback. So, tell me about what is plugin searches for fifths and eighths between any voices, not only between soprano and bass. Well, okay, the plugin's hidden fifths and eighths only. Is that true? All right, I hadn't really tested all the things, but yeah, it is true that the plugin will identify some false positives, some things that I look at and say, well, that's not really a problem. And it might miss some things like the tritone leap here that I thought was potentially problematic. Everyone has their own idea of what's a problem and what's not, because again, this isn't go to jail rules. These are cause and effect rules, and they're fairly subjective, really, because whatever the rules were, Bach broke his own rules. And we only know their rules in Bach because we derived them by looking at his works, not because he ever wrote them down. Actually, he wrote some things down, but a lot of the stuff we just sort of learned by looking at his works to say, well, this is probably the rule he was following because he sure did this a lot or didn't do this much. So anyhow, I hope that if you have a theory background, you were able to follow along as fast as I was moving. If your theory background was such that some of the specifics of what I was talking about went over your head, I still hope just the general process of looking at how I was trying to create interesting lines in my music, interesting melodic lines in the accompaniment, so that it's not just accompaniment, it's its own interesting melody. Ba-do-da-da. Ba-do-da-da-do-da-da-da-da-da-da. There's my sight singing for you. Oh, here's this G sharp. That G should have a courtesy natural on it. Watch this. Plugins, accidentals, add courtesy accidentals. Boom, there it is. So, yeah, and it also has some specific rules for how it knows when to add them. So yeah, just the general idea of trying to create interesting melodies that still serve a harmonic purpose, where you're thinking about the dissonances you create, you're thinking about the harmonies you're creating, but you're trying to create interesting lines. This is going to create much more interesting music than just having melody in the right hand, chords in the left hand. So I solved the tritone with the next note. This tritone here, by having it leap there, is that what you mean? Because there's also a tritone from this G sharp, from this C sharp to this G. Basically, this line and this line are mirror images of each other, right? G down to C sharp up to G. This one resolves in contrary motion. This one resolves in contrary motion. This is all by the book stuff that happens all over the place. I'm going to sign off and complete this piece at my own pace while the video uploads. I'll upload it then and attach it in the comments. And yeah, again, I hope that this is of use and that people are able to use it to maybe create music, a little more interest in your music. And I will be back next week. I've got a few different ideas for topics. As always, feel free to share comments with me. Drop me a line, Marc with a C at MuseScore.com to give me suggestions. You can also leave the comments there on my website, MasteringMuseScore.com, under the MuseScore Café section. Also, again, I have to just put in the plug for the online course for MuseScore that really shows you how to do virtually everything you've ever wanted to know. If you don't already have my book or haven't already just studied every single video and every single tutorial out there, if you're not already inundated with learning materials to help you with MuseScore, I highly, highly recommend my course as a great way to get into it. So if you go to MasteringMuseScore.com, you will see a prominent button that says here, click here to enroll. So end of commercial. And I will have this posted along with the video shortly. And I hope you guys have a fantastic week. See you later.